In 1932, the Australian Army marched into the outback armed with machine guns. Their enemy weighed 50 pounds and had a brain the size of a walnut. And when the smoke cleared, the army retreated, defeated, humiliated, and utterly bewildered. Imagine standing in the dust of Western Australia, watching a soldier empty an entire belt of ammunition into a charging wall of 6-foot birds, only to see them scatter, regroup, and charge again. The machine gun jams, the emus do not stop. This is not a joke, this is not a legend, this happened, and it is one of the strangest military defeats in recorded human history. To understand how a modern army ended up in open combat with flightless birds, you need to understand Australia in the early 1930s, a country already on its knees. The Great Depression had arrived with savage force. Unemployment had climbed above 30%. Farmers who had been promised land grants after the First World War were struggling to survive on wheat fields that barely broke even. These were ex-soldiers, men who had survived Gallipoli and the Western Front, now reduced to watching their crops wither and their savings disappear. The wheat-growing region of the Campion district in Western Australia had been one of the government's great promises: fertile land, a new life, a reward for service. By 1932, that promise felt like a cruelty. And then, as if the universe had decided things were not quite difficult enough, approximately 20,000 emus arrived. They came, as they did every year, migrating north after breeding season. But this year, they came in numbers that darkened the horizon. They poured across fences, they trampled crops, they consumed everything in their path. The farmers, desperate and furious, turned to the only institution they believed could help them. They turned to the government. The man who answered their call was Sir George Pearce, Australia's Minister of Defence. Pearce had a reputation for ruthlessness. He had earned the nickname Minister for Starvation during an earlier political controversy, and he saw the emu problem as something that could be solved with characteristic directness. If the farmers wanted the emus gone, the military would remove them. It was, on paper, an elegant solution. The army needed training exercises, the farmers needed relief, the government needed good press. Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery was assigned to lead the operation. He arrived in the Campion district in November 1932 with 2 soldiers, 2 Lewis guns, light machine guns capable of firing 500 rounds per minute, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The press came too, summoned by the Defense Department, eager to capture what everyone expected would be a swift and satisfying victory. Newsreel cameras were positioned. Journalists sharpened their pencils. Major Meredith surveyed the landscape with professional confidence. What could go wrong? The emus, it turned out, had not been briefed on the plan. On November 2nd, 1932, the first engagement began near a dam where a large group of emus had gathered to drink. The soldiers opened fire. The results were, to put it diplomatically, not what anyone had anticipated. The birds scattered before the guns could cut them down in numbers. Where military planners had imagined tight, manageable formations, rows of birds falling cleanly under sustained fire, they instead encountered something closer to a living, adaptive chaos. The emus broke into small groups the instant firing began, dispersing across the scrubland with a speed and unpredictability that made targeting almost impossible. Major Meredith later observed, with barely concealed disbelief, that the emus, quote, did not bunch up but scattered. Even when birds were hit, they frequently did not fall. Ornithologist Dominic Cervanti, who studied emus throughout his career, would later describe them as seeming to possess, quote, a bulletproof hide. He noted that they could sustain multiple wounds and continue moving with what appeared to be complete indifference. The soldiers attempted to mount one of the Lewis guns on a truck to pursue the fleeing birds across open ground. The terrain immediately made this unworkable. The vehicle bounced and jolted across the rough scrub so violently that accurate fire became impossible. After 12 days of operations, Major Meredith's forces had expended nearly 2,500 rounds of ammunition. The confirmed kill count was approximately 50 emus. 50. The press, who had arrived expecting triumph, began filing very different kinds of stories. Back in Canberra, politicians were reading the headlines, and the questions being asked in Parliament were growing sharper by the day. On November 18, 1932, the operation was suspended. But the emus were still there. The farmers begged for the campaign to resume. Pierce relented, and in mid-December, the soldiers returned. This second phase was marginally more effective. The soldiers learned to wait near water sources, patient, still, watching the birds drink before opening fire. Kill rates climbed. By the end of December, Meredith's forces had killed approximately 100 birds per week, at a cost of around 10 rounds per confirmed kill. He actually considered this a success. But in the halls of Parliament, the damage was done. Sir George Pierce, the man who had authorized the operation with such confidence, was being savaged in the press. Opposition politician Sir James Mitchell rose in Parliament and delivered a line that would follow Pierce for the rest of his career. He called the campaign a tribute not to the soldiers, but to the emus. Ornithologist Cervanti had watched the entire operation unfold and offered his own assessment. The emus, he said, had displayed a military cunning that rivaled that of the humans opposing them. Each morning, the soldiers woke to find the birds had moved. Each afternoon, the formations broke before the guns could find their range. It was not chaos. It looked somehow deliberate. Then came the moment that ended it all. A formation of emus, hundreds of them, was spotted moving toward a dam. The soldiers moved into position. The guns were loaded. Meredith gave the order. The Lewis guns opened fire. And then one of them jammed. The birds scattered in every direction. The second gun kept firing. Birds fell, but not enough, never enough. Dust and feathers and the mechanical scream of the gun. And then silence. The birds were gone. The soldiers looked at each other across the empty scrubland. Meredith wrote in his official report that if he had to fight a war against emus, he would want artillery. Not machine guns. Artillery. Against birds. In February 1934, after a third campaign had also failed to deliver meaningful results, the military withdrew for the final time. The emus were not significantly reduced in number. The government quietly authorized the farmers to handle the problem themselves, using bounty schemes and their own firearms. Between 1945 and 1960, Government hunters operating under the bounty program killed nearly 300,000 emus. The military operation, by comparison, had been an embarrassment on every level. Sir George Pearce never fully escaped the nickname he acquired in its aftermath. Some called it a campaign that had gifted Australia its most peculiar military legend. Major Meredith, for his part, reportedly maintained a grudging admiration for the birds until the end of his life. He compared their durability under fire to that of Zulu warriors, high praise, or perhaps simply honest bewilderment dressed up as respect. The Great Emu War reminds us that the most dangerous adversary is not always the one with the largest brain. Sometimes it is the one that simply refuses to behave the way you expected it to. If you found this story remarkable, subscribe. We uncover forgotten history every week.